Ladies and gentlemen, Vox Podcast live from the World International Headquarters of Vox Stuff in Brea, California.
International, I like
International, that. Yes, the international headquarters for Vox and all of its affiliates. We're going to be selling some essential oils and we've got some jewelry I think you'll really be interested in. But that's coming down the road. Hey, we are so excited to be a part of your life, whether you're in the gym, which you should be, whether you're driving, which we hope you're not, whether you're sleeping, which this actually is a great cure for insomnia.
They're probably driving.
Perfect. Please keep your eyes open and your hands at 2 and 4. And if you need to wave at fellow drivers who cut you off, just tell them that they are number one, using the most appropriate finger possible.
If they're driving at 2 or 4, they're either about to make a left-hand turn.
Isn't this 2 and 4?
That's 10 and 2.
Oh, 10 and 2.
2 and 4.
Yeah. Okay, shut up. Maybe there are motorcycles and it's just 3 and 9. Or maybe you're just at 6. You know, you're just like this. You're low riding.
Low riding. I like that.
They're rolling and they hating.
They rolling.
So this is Mike, of course, and Andy continues to find his way into my house every Thursday to record these dumb things. So, couple of things. Number one, we've got another live show coming up. April 20th, and that is in Villain Studios in Placentia, and we're going to do a few things a bit differently. Mm-hmm. There's rumor, and I don't know if this is true, there's rumor of maybe a dance contest. I'm not quite sure. Could be prizes for a dance contest. I don't know. As always, there's free Coors Light. So, which... Right, we do. We bribe people now, or drive them away. Depending.
It was either that or T-shirts, and lo and behold, Coors Light is cheaper.
Yes. Oh, that's hurtful. Also, if you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that. If you want to like us, just like us. We're on iTunes, and voxpodcast.com is where the podcast resides, and then Vox Community. We actually have a little church out of this thing. Is Vox, what is it? VoxOC.com. Dang.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Today, we keep, it's a sign of how incredibly popular we've become. That there are people who either are desperate enough or incredibly gracious enough that say yes to our invitations to be on our show. So I am a huge book reader, literally a huge person that reads books and a person that reads a huge amount of books. Both statements are true. And I came across a book recently that I absolutely adored, and it turns out the authors are local and guys I wanted to meet anyway. And so they made the trek from, where's San Marcos?
San Marcos, yep.
Where is that?
North San Diego County.
Oh, okay.
It's almost where I live.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Almost. I mean, sort of.
We should have.
I'm in Capistrano Beach.
We should have carpooled, man.
We should have.
Yeah.
Okay. No wonder you're so just relaxed and nice.
Yeah.
We're so chill down south.
I know. Seriously. Don't you grow marijuana down there? I mean,
do.
Just as a general rule.
I do. I've got a farm.
And then Kyle is a professor. I'll have him explain of what. But where do you live?
Fullerton.
Okay, so they've trekked a long way to be at the World Vox headquarters in Brea, California, here today. So we have a full studio, and Jamin and Kyle, why don't you guys just introduce yourselves real quick, and then I'll introduce the book.
Sure. I'm Kyle Strobel. I am a professor, as you mentioned, at Biola University at the seminary.
Go War Eagles.
That's right. Yes, go
Amen.
Eagles. I am a professor of spiritual theology.
Oh!
So
that's a thing.
It is a thing.
That's a thing?
It is a thing.
Now, what's the difference
that sounds
between
redundant to me. It's
what's
like
the
theology.
and unspiritual theology?
There's a lot, hopefully.
Okay.
You know, what's funny is, the seminary is all pretend, right? We made it all up, right? There's none of these degrees are real, of course.
I love
these
that.
are all. We got it from Schleiermacher of all people, but that's another story.
Oh my goodness!
But
Schleiermacher references 2 minutes in.
2 minutes in, you know it's going to be good. So you have all these disciplines, and there actually was this whole discipline we used to call Christian ethics, that we now call spiritual formation.
Okay,
and it had no place to land in the seminary, and so it used to be where you could go to seminary and never actually talk about what life in the spirit entails. You could never talk about the kind of phenomena of the Christian experience.
Well, sure,
and
because
those
you
kind of
need to
things.
have your view of predestination straight.
That's
That's the
right.
most important thing.
So we're trying to kind of pick that back up,
I
and we
love
do it
that.
under the vein of spiritual theology.
So, okay, so what, like, examples of a couple of course titles that you would teach?
Intro to Spiritual Theology.
Oh,
So it's pretty straightforward.
We're not the most creative
There's-
in terms of names, but
Seminaries are also not known for creativity.
yes, exactly. Okay,
yeah.
all right, perfect.
Hence why I never went.
Yes, yes. Okay, and then
so so every Talbot student has to take a 3-class course in spiritual theology.
Talbot is the Graduate School
Yeah,
of Biola.
That's the seminary, yeah.
Yes.
So if you're going to seminary, no matter if you're doing a philosophy degree or a New Testament or an MDiv to be a pastor, you have to do a 1.5-year course now in spiritual theology. You start with Intro to Spiritual Formation, then you do a Personal Foundations in Spiritual Formation
Yep,
class,
yep.
And then there's a year of spiritual direction, a 1.5 year of group direction, and it's a pretty intensive 3-retreat kind of process. And
It's so funny. It sounds so to somebody like me. That sounds horrific.
yep,
And because I was going for philosophy.
as was I.
Yep. And I was like, what? No, I
Yep.
don't want to do journals. I don't want to do retreats.
Totally.
No, thank you.
I was the guy in the back of this class giggling half the time.
Yes. And here you are.
And here I am teaching it now, so there's a bit, there's the Lord is irony.
I love it. What was your doctorate in?
So I when I was at Talbot, we probably overlapped a bit. My background's in philosophy and New Testament, and then I went and did my PhD in systematics. And so
Okay.
I'm a systematic theologian by training. And the focus of my work was Jonathan Edwards' theology, and my kind of specific expertise is in his Trinitarian theology. But I'm also interested in his spiritual understanding of spirituality.
Okay.
Jonathan Edwards, for those of you who don't know him, was early. He wasn't American because it was before the war, but he's called America's greatest theologian, which I feel is really American that we claim him anyways. So that's got a kind of Trumpy kind of to it. So we own him. So that's cool. And but he was early 1700s, and he's considered by most who know him to be the greatest philosopher as well as the greatest theologian of American history. And so in many ways, the forefather of evangelicalism. So
Okay. Boom.
yeah.
And then do you work at a church too? Do you teach?
So I'm on a preaching team at a church, so I preach monthly. There's
Okay.
about 5 of us, and I'm one of the 2 main kind
Nice.
of teaching
Okay.
leaders of that
Awesome.
group. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah.
Jamin,
Yeah.
let's talk about Jamin's look for a second. Both these guys have beards, but Jamin's got this salt and pepper thing going on with brown eyes. And how old are you?
I am 34.
Oh my lord.
We're the same age.
But look at the package. I mean, not literally, but look at what we got here. We've got the youth of the face. We've got the wisdom of the accoutrements to the face.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, like
Yeah.
you will look like this for the next 40 years, and it will be glorious.
I'll take it. What's funny is I have had people from time to time ask me, so for those who are listening and are not seeing me in the room, I have gray kind of throughout my hair, but I have this one gray wisp at the front of my
awesome.
hair. And
It's
I've had
amazing.
people ask me if I, quote, do that.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
do you do that? Is that
Yeah.
something you did? And I like, as in my body naturally developed gray hair. No, that they think this is kind of like
A highlight.
a hipster move,
frost.
like an intentional move towards
No,
the gray.
it's beautiful.
And no, this is
It's like when who was the X-Men person?
oh yeah,
who had Rogue, yes, who had the
Yeah,
silver thing.
Rogue.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes that's a sign of something big
Hey.
happening.
I'll take it.
So-
yeah, special powers. So
Anyway.
aside from my gray wisp that is natural, not done,
And Jamin.
and my name is Jamin,
Which
which
is
is also
awesome.
given to me. It wasn't a name I decided to transition to later in life.
How many Bob Marley
Oh, man.
references? We
Oh,
be
man.
Jamin.
Yeah. The number of times that someone responds with Jamin, kind of like Jamin.
Oh.
And then the question comes, has anyone ever called you that? And
No,
my thought is,
that's-
yeah, you're the first. And then usually the Bob Marley song starts getting
Yeah, of
sung
course,
over me
of
as kind of a chorus
of
of my
course,
life.
of
And
course.
having played basketball growing up and not really being able to dunk, having been a DJ in high school,
That's what I'm talking about.
The Jamin thing was, it really tried to stick
It
to
did,
me in
it
ways
did.
that were unfortunate. But I am a pastor. Have been a pastor for, 13, 14 years. So I'm at a church now in San Marcos that I've only been at actually for about a year. My family moved down there about 8 months ago. I was commuting for a while, but born and raised in Orange County. So just a little bit further up the freeway near Capo Beach. Grew up in Mission Viejo.
Okay.
Born and raised in Southern California. Worked at several churches. Went to Biola actually as well as an undergrad. Went to Talbot Seminary where Kyle now teaches. Did a couple MAs there. And so joined a friend of ours from seminary down in the church in San Marcos and kind of a shared leadership model. So we're two pastoral staff who are also elders, and we share primary teaching responsibility and oversight of kind of the staff, but kind of share that with a group of other elders in the life of the church. And so it's been joyful and challenging and all of the above. It's our first kind of big move for my family in life, having lived in Southern California most of my life, and my wife as well. This is our first big step into the unexpected and unknown. We had our fourth child and moved, and I took a new job. All of the above. So a lot of change, with that comes challenges, but also lots of beautiful new things.
So let's write a book on top of all that.
And let's add a book to it.
Why not?
And so let me just set up the book. We're not a podcast that plugs, but in this case, man, I'd highly recommend it. It's The Way of the Dragon and The Way of the Lamb, correct? Or is it verse? Is it or verse?
Yeah,
Verses.
Or The Way of the Lamb.
Okay, or The Way of the Lamb. And for those of you who are not familiar with Christian imagery, that could sound like a Lord of the Rings sort of sequel, which would be awesome.
Bruce Lee movie.
Bruce Lee bio.
Bruce
maybe.
Lee.
Oh,
there
nice.
is a Way of the Dragon movie with Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
The Lamb.
So let's just.
That's awesome.
If your listeners want to go more that direction, we would not be offended. We would understand.
I saw Chuck Norris like 2 months ago at Orange County Airport, and he is a short man. He is a very short man. I was like, the thought entered my head, I could take Chuck Norris, which I rebuked immediately because I know that's not true.
Yeah. Chuck Norris's spirit rebuked that.
Yes, exactly. So the book is, when it came out recently, correct?
January.
And of course you can get it online and everywhere else. But it's a book about power. And if you've been following our podcast, it's a book about power and weakness and how churches very often, and us as leaders in churches very often fall into definitions of power and portrayals of power that aren't Jesus-y. And so The Way of the Lamb is taken from Revelation. The sacrificial lamb that Jesus comes as versus the way of the dragon is another image from the book of Revelation of the way of power. We've called it power under versus power over. They call it power from above or power from below. So above is reference to the lamb, power of the kingdom of the heavens, power below, reference to the power that we're used to. Is that all a fair summary? Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, real fast. Let me just check something.
What are you doing right now?
I think I might have put his mic backwards. As I'm listening to him, I'm like, man, you're really bassy.
It's a tight ship,
bassy.
Brothers and sisters.
Are we better now?
Oh my goodness, there you are.
Okay.
That's right.
Now you sound 34. You were sounding like 12.
Oh, was I really? Yeah.
No,
That's good.
Now you're back.
Yeah.
Now you're back. So the way of the dragon. Or the way of the lamb. And so it's a book about power. It's hard for me to. I just want to summarize the book because it's so good. But it's an interesting sort of format. Why don't you give us just a bit of an overview of how you structured the book, and then I want to explore. So this is not going to be a podcast about the book. It's going to be a podcast about what the book's about, which is genius and stuff we've explored on our podcast that I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear what these guys are thinking. So go ahead and just kind of summarize the thing.
Yeah. Well, the way the book is structured is really shaped around a quite literal kind of journey or pilgrimage. And so the book kind of narrates our journey over the last several years of going and visiting what we would call kind of sages of this way of power and weakness that we talk about in the book. And so we sit at the feet of sages of the Christian faith, folks that have for many decades now kind of modeled, not only kind of taught on and spoken about this way, but really have modeled it in their life. So folks like Dallas Willard, Eugene Peterson, Jean Vanier, John Perkins, Marva Dawn, James Houston, and I'm forgetting somebody. J.I. Packer.
The other one.
Yeah. As if. So, and for Kyle and I, much of the impetus behind kind of narrating the journey throughout the book wasn't just kind of a clever way to write a book, but it really was the result of a genuine journey we felt like the Lord was taking us on. And here we are, guys, in our late 20s, early 30s, who are wrestling with these questions of what does it mean to really embrace kind of Jesus' way of power, when so much of our own heart's desire seems to be antithetical to that at times, and so much of the culture we find ourselves in seems to be really baptizing that as an appropriate way to lead and to approach kind of ministry and thinking about our vocations and embracing forms of control and talking about winning and dominating. And wow, and here we hear Jesus come along and talk about the first will be last and the last will be first, and don't seek the seats of honor, and these are really unfortunate statements when you're headed down a different direction, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
As we were kind of faced with this tension in our own hearts, realizing we felt like God was kind of calling us to really explore what this other way of power Jesus was proposing would really look like. We knew that the answer wasn't just kind of, well, maybe study for a couple years, read the right books, and we'll kind of land on it. Maybe by the time we're 33, 34, like we'll kind of have this thing figured out.
Yes.
But rather, we needed to really look towards those who have embodied this way in their life for many years. And so that took us on this literal journey that then kind of shapes the story of the book of us talking about our own struggles with these things, our own temptations to power, and really earnestly seeking wisdom from others who have demonstrated and articulated another way. And so the book kind of walks people through that. And each person we talk with kind of develops this way of power and weakness through a little bit of a different grid, or they might have a different kind of area of emphasis. But what's incredible is, despite the diversity of the folks we interviewed, and there is a wide diversity, I mean, people that all would identify as Christian, but certainly we would kind of be located in different tribes or even different parts of the church, right? We have Jean Vanier, who's Catholic, and we have J.I. Packer, who's not, right? And yet there's uniformity all along the way about a certain way that Jesus calls us to embrace power.
Yeah, how would you contrast, just briefly, Kyle, the way from above, the way of Jesus, let's call it the way of Jesus versus the way of the world?
Yeah, well, the imagery we took was from James 3.
Wasn't Revelation?
The dragon image is from Revelation, but the way from above versus the way from below language is from James 3. And so James contrasts the way from above, which is kind of highlighting that Jesus, the one who kind of came down. And so you have the way, sometimes it's called the kingdom of heaven, for instance, is the way of God. And then the way of below. And what's interesting about James 3, and quite honestly a bit unnerving, is in James 3 we're told that this way from below is, James's language is, it's earthly, it's unspiritual, and it's demonic. And the church for millennia now has taken those three categories and called them the world, the flesh, and the devil. And what's interesting is you hear these categories like, wow, that's kind of gnarly, like these aren't small things, and so you kind of expect, well, what would this way look like? It must be murder, it must be, it's pretty ratcheted up language, right? But James 3 claims that the two key attributes are selfish ambition and jealousy. And that is a harder pill to swallow, because it's like, okay, the flesh, selfish ambition, jealousy, these are bad things. But then it links it to the world and the devil. Wow, okay, what does that mean? And so as we kind of wrestle through these categories, we say, well, wow, this is, the scriptures are using the kind of highest possible language, and it's using vices that we know in our own lives. And
it's almost like God knew us.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's like
it's
one of the most maybe profound and shocking claims of Marva Dawn, who I know is a beloved author of yours as well. At one point, Marva makes the claim that if you want to see this, you want to see selfish ambition, just go to a pastor's conference.
Oh my Lord, yes.
And that hits hard. I'm an academic, and the entire academy is built on this.
Sure.
When I go to an academic conference, no one looks at each other in the eyes. When you walk by, everyone's looking at each other's chests, because that's where our name tags are, and everyone's wanting to know, is there someone worthwhile that I should grab and talk to? Where's the power? And you see these groups of power develop, and so some of this, it's just so subtle.
Yeah.
We don't even notice it, but Scripture now is ratcheting it up to say, no, this is, or every evil vice, every vile thing, James 3 says, is wrapped around this. And so this, where we began to see things that we would very easily say, yeah, that's not ideal. Yeah, that shouldn't happen. But it just does. And
Right.
Scripture was pressing us to say something much harsher, actually, about it.
Yeah, so part of the space we try to occupy is both the deconstructive side of, I think God does give great permission to critique His beautiful bride for the sake of its beauty. But I don't think that's ever enough. That's why we actually started a church out of the podcast. We felt like we had an obligation to just not be critical, but to try something positively.
Yeah.
And so I want to spend a bit of time because I deeply resonate as I've sat in pastors' conferences, as I've taught in pastors' conferences. I've been one of those speakers in the back room, and you're like, oh man. One of the things that you say that is striking, but it's a reflection of the James passage, is that a lot of American churches openly affirm the way from below, this way of seeing power, this way of seeing significance and status, and so on. Can we explore that a little bit in terms of, all right, pastors' conferences for people that aren't pastors?
Sure.
What's that look like in church? What are the symptoms? Because I think a lot of our folks will resonate immediately with, oh yeah, this is. I mean, like for instance, we have a record of the 50 fastest growing churches that comes out every year.
That's right.
Quite different from the Jesus who said, the first will be last, the last will be first. That very often the smallest is the most significant. But we just put up with that as if that's just the kind of a thing. So when you guys were starting to say, it's openly affirmed, this way from below is openly affirmed in many churches, and we'll confess that I'm a part of the problem. We're parts of the problem.
Totally.
We've all fallen in love with this,
Yeah.
but we're now trying to detox, and so we're not pointing at the church as if we're not part of the issue. But what would you say? What would you say how you've seen this?
Well, I mean, the problem is it's almost so ubiquitous. It's hard to kind of land on things. But, one of the obvious things to me right away, and even compared with how we wanted to approach it, we want it to be stark. You go to a pastor's conference, you probably will find the youngest, the biggest church, the most impressive rhetorically.
Yeah.
You will not find a 95-year-old who has done 60 years of faithful ministry.
Yeah, in a 100-person church.
In a 100-person church, who's faithfully married, buried, and baptized decade after decade after decade. The one of the ways you see this play itself out, even in a church context, is we often, from the church's standpoint, often long for a certain kind of leader to attach ourselves to, someone who impresses us. What's so funny, already in the Bible you get this, right? No one wants an apostle who's in jail.
Right.
Paul's kind of a letdown, right?
Right.
So right away,
Right.
This is one of the temptations I think that Christians can have, is to think there was this ideal church back there somewhere that we could just get back to. It's like, no, it was bad from day one.
Right.
Things went wrong quickly. One of the, some of the things that get in the news, right? When you have pastors who are manipulating the New York Times bestseller list.
Right.
Right? This is evil.
Right.
This is, as Scripture would say, demonic activity. But we often just kind of say, oh, well, it's not ideal, but,
Well, the thing that we say, and I listened to a podcast of the guy who came up with that idea.
Oh, interesting.
Oh,
Okay.
yes. And the way he justified it was, here are all the kingdom ends
Totally.
that were met.
Sure.
Yep. So it's a means justify, or the ends justify the means thinking. And that is the way from below is justified in American evangelicalism.
Totally.
Look at how big my church is.
Yes.
If it's
That's right.
wrong, God wouldn't be blessing it.
Yeah,
Right.
totally. Well, and the temptation, I think, and I'm sure this is true of other vocations, but for pastors, as you know, it's so easy to say, well, since I'm doing this for ministry, or I can just kind of naively say for the glory of God on anything I do.
Right.
Yeah.
And suddenly that means God's on my side.
Right.
Rubber stamp of approval.
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's
no
right.
matter how I go about getting it done, one of the passages in Scripture that kind of, to be honest, haunts me.
You talk about the Bible a lot. I just want to point that out.
Yes,
So
yes.
For
this
our
is. I'm
non-Bible
sorry. I'm a
listeners,
seminary professor.
It's okay.
It comes with
They pay you. They pay you to do that.
That's right.
Okay.
But
very spiritual theology.
well, let me do two things. I'll start with the Bible, then I'll turn to a contemporary example.
Okay,
That's going to
beautiful.
nerd me out beautifully.
Oh, I
though.
love it.
But in Galatians, the Apostle Paul writes a letter, and he talks about sowing and reaping. So this is it's a farming imagery. Like you're sowing seed in the ground, you sow orange seeds in the ground, you get an orange tree. But he says you can sow in the flesh, but if you do, you will reap in the flesh. And the image there is that just because you have the right end in mind,
Right.
if you sow in a way that is antithetical to that end,
Right.
it will destroy you.
The flesh is usually a picture of life done by the self, for the self,
That's
in
right.
the self's own power. So
Yeah.
there's no God inclusion in that.
Yeah.
So if go ahead.
So, for those out here now, again, this might alienate me, it might nerd
No,
me out. So
do it,
either way,
do it.
But if you want to take our book and ask, what would this book look like, just totally in culture, like just in our culture, this is just what Harry Potter's about.
Oh, first of all, we love Harry Potter.
There we go.
At the Vox podcast.
So the entire Harry Potter narrative is about how power and weakness, the way of Jesus, ultimately destroys the way of evil.
yes.
And so you think about Harry, who embodies weakness.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing distinctively special about him. He has no power compared to Voldemort. What's interesting, though, he does. And Dumbledore's constantly trying to convince Harry he's more powerful.
Right.
Because love is a power. One of the temptations in all this is to just say, well, we just embrace our weakness, I guess. And
Right. It's very passive.
it can be very passive.
Yeah.
No, love is a kind of power. Martin Luther King, more than maybe anyone,
Come on.
recognized this
Someone's
reality, right?
preaching now.
There we go.
Somebody
And
finally.
so if you think, one of the things I love about the Harry Potter narrative, if you have the two groups. You have Voldemort's group, who are the Death Eaters. Like, they're going to try
Yeah.
to destroy death. They want to become immortal. They want to embrace power of the self.
Yeah.
But by embracing death, they consume it, and it slowly destroys them from within. The good guys, right? Dumbledore's group, Harry's group, they are the Order of the Phoenix. The Phoenix is the bird that accepts death because it trusts in resurrection.
Come on now.
Whoa.
Come on now.
And
Look
out.
As it embraces...
on now.
And you all call it magic.
That's right.
Come on,
That's
this
right.
was gospel from the second
Yes.
the pen
Right.
hit the paper.
Harry Potter's about magic the same way...
J.K. Rowling is actually a what do you call that? An anagram for Jonathan Edwards.
That's right.
And
That's right.
that's what's amazing.
The degree,
That's
the
right.
degree to which that would be anathema to a certain segment out there is astounding.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, why else was the taking Harry Potter as sacred text #1 on
Yes,
religion and
that-
spirituality?
yes, that
for
transplanted
a strong
Joel
running
Osteen.
month? That's right.
Correct.
There's reason.
That's right. It's brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, she knows her stuff. She recognizes the way of Voldemort. As the only ones. In Harry in the stories becomes the master of death, but the master of death is the person who can walk to their death because they trust in resurrection.
Right.
Which is why Harry doesn't use any of the three. Powers, the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone. He doesn't use any of these to defeat death because he recognizes, I hand myself over to it. And that's what gave him power. Whereas you see in that wonderful scene about eternity, whatever that scene is, you
Right.
see Voldemort withered. It looks powerful. And so the image gives us, there's powerful people in our culture, right? There's people of power. But at their core, they're withered. They're actually unpowerful in Jesus's terms.
Ooh, come on now.
And I think, I'm not going to piggyback on Harry Potter because that's just too good. But this pastor can't resist speaking.
Do it.
Returning to the primary question of how do we see this show up? And
Yeah.
I think there's lots of ways it shows up, but in my own life and ministry, one of the ways I've seen this show up, at least within the kind of the church context I've been in, evangelicalism broadly speaking, is a marginalization of certain people and a marginalization of certain practices that have been proper to the church. And so first to the people, if the way we think about what we're doing in worship and what we think we're doing when we gather as a church, what we think we're doing with our programming, what we think we're doing when we're talking about reaching out to people, if the people that are already marginalized in the culture, that are already outcasts and rejected, are not actually centered in our understanding of what it means to reach out, of what it means to shape a community of safety and one that is inviting and welcoming people to meet Jesus. If those people are not only not centered, but actually are marginalized within our communities as well, in the same way they would be elsewhere. So I think of those who have mental and physical disabilities.
Come on.
I think of those who are elderly. As James Houston, one of the people we interviewed, says, what we've done with the elderly is the apartheid of the church today. These people are at best marginalized and often sent out to the pasture to graze or whatever they might do in the same way our culture has done with them. Yes. Yeah. And so what we've done with those who in our culture are viewed as weak if the church is kind of a mere reflection of that, if our worship services are ordered in such a way that those people will be viewed as a hindrance or a disruption to doing it the right way,
Come
quote unquote,
on.
we know we've fallen prey to the wrong kind of power. So that's the people piece.
Love that.
The second piece to the practices is notice, at least within the context I've been in, and probably true for you as well, Mike, and know for you, Kyle, Andy, that
We don't know about Andy.
I have no context.
we'll see where he lands in this.
Some say I am like the wind, and therefore I am outside of context.
But notice the practices that have been really elevated and given more time and center stage. They're the practices that we feel embolden more our gifts, our talents, our abilities, our strength. It can leverage our talents. They give us a greater sense of control over what's going on. So it's preaching. It's me talking for a long time. Yeah. Secondarily, it's others on stage singing and making loud noise that kind of generates a certain kind of experience, right? And notice what often gets marginalized are things like communion, right? From the worship service, or even the public reading of scripture that it's just being read by someone and we're not unpacking it yet. Right? These are practices that are reminding us that there's someone else who's primarily at work here doing something, and that it's not contingent upon us to make it happen.
Even the way we do worship can fall prey to that, right?
Sure.
It's you even talk about worship becomes an avenue towards something else. And what do you mean by that?
Well, it becomes an avenue towards kind of a felt sense of transcendence and excitation. It's about kind of feeling powerful and feeling I'm a part of something powerful,
the rush,
and big and exciting, and the same maybe kind of existential moment we get at a Mumford & Sons concert with 100,000 people. We would be content with that same kind of feeling in a worship service environment. In fact, that would be viewed as kind of successful. And of course, we would define it as the Spirit of God at work. Right? But
it just means everyone felt awesome.
That's right. That's right.
And God can use it. I mean, he uses asses like me and Andy in particular. And
go figure.
And so we're, he can use anything. So praise be to him. Yeah. But there is this seeming infatuation I've been a part of. It's reflected in the elevation of the Sunday production over every other area of the church.
Sure.
So it's not the community aspect, it's not the serving the poor aspect, it's not the justice aspect, it's the weekend show.
Sure.
And it just burns people out. It rests on an individual personality. I love that you say most pastors use their personality to gain a platform or a following rather than trust in something else. Yeah. You say, and Kyle, talk to this a little bit. You say being special is the Achilles heel of most churches. What's that mean?
The desire of specialness. I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting to kind of talk to some people more globally. Is this like an American phenomenon, or is it broader than that? But I think particularly in America, we have this desire. We want to stand out. And so if I go to a church, I don't want to just go to a church. I want to go to a special church. And that usually is going to be linked to technique. So the church, that's awesome, right? The church, maybe that's great music or impressive buildings or something along those lines. More often than not, and again, this I think is interesting, is that it means a person specific. There's one special person
That's what
there,
I'm talking about.
or maybe a handful of special people there,
That's right.
depending.
That's right.
And I want, if I can somehow link my kind of self, I can link myself to them, kind of ride their coattails in their greatness, then somehow that means I'm special too. And I was a part of a church for a while like this, that I remember we would almost weekly have it was very funny. I'm not sure why we would do this, and it was weird to even think that now, no one noticed how weird this was, but we'd be reminded how lucky we were to be there. Aren't we? Isn't it amazing that we get to be here, right? Or there's one of the stories.
Wow.
Yeah, and you don't, when you're a part of a crowd, it's interesting. It's very easy to manipulate crowds.
Sure.
It's very easy to give a crowd a sense of transcendence, a sense of specialness, and then you ride that wave by reminding them things like that. Wow, aren't we lucky to be here, right? And suddenly it's like, wow, I'm a part of something bigger.
Yeah, I was going to push back on that, because what about that faux pas? Because so many folks feel like there's just so much value in feeling like I'm a part of something bigger than myself. That's kind of such a driver for people who participate in a certain church, or even why I've talked to some people who came to faith in that same kind of perspective. It just made me realize.
But then it's motive,
right?
So you can be a part of something bigger than yourself for the sake of emptying yourself, or you can be part of something bigger than yourself for the sake of filling yourself.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And it seems like that sense of transcendence we're talking about feeds into the sort of narcissism of notoriety, is another word you guys use. The idea to feel special, being attached to, and so I'm special because I'm a part of this. That stands, to me, it stands in contrast to...
Totally. Well, it sounds like a solvent to weakness, though, too. Because it's kind of like, well, now I feel like I've gained power because I'm part of something powerful.
Right.
Versus being able to stand alone in weakness and just realize this is really humbly who I am.
Right.
And if my relationship with Jesus is close, that would feel enough.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, it does seem very contrary, like it draws you away from the reality of your weakness and rather institutionally brings you power and alters like what you think you stand with, because you would say, well, I'm a part of this church or I'm a part of this movement, so it brings you some intrinsic value.
Sure.
Well, and I think it plays on the individualism of our culture and this notion that in order to be me, I've got to discover these kind of latent potentialities in me. I've got these things that I could be great. Whatever, and this is the average person and maybe this place can help me actualize myself. One of the hardest things I think to really internalize, even for people who have been Christians for years, who follow Jesus, when we hear things that, like the Apostle Paul will say, that your life is hidden with Christ in God. That means...
That's the Bible.
That's
again.
more Bible. That means your true self is external to yourself. And this is one of the most freeing things, but we're convinced it's death. We've become so convinced as a culture that in me is where my power, my greatness, my ability lies. And that is debilitating. Like when you think of it, like my generation grew up hearing like you can do anything you put your mind to.
Oh yeah.
It's like, is there a bigger lie than that? There's most things I can't do. Like as a parent, there's most things that you're not going to be able to do, quite honestly. And we don't want we want this kind of vision of I can
unlimited
do anything. It's unlimited, and that's debilitating.
Yeah,
right? That's
absolutely.
death.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the realities of our culture that's just been kind of imbibed within the church is this idea that kind of the flourishing self is the fully actualized self. And at least according to Jesus, actually the flourishing self is not the self kind of fully actualized, but it's the abiding self, as Christ will say. And John 15 is a passage.
What the hell does that
mean?
Seriously, go.
Well,
go with that.
John 15 is a passage we want to turn to
Bible.
here that is Jesus kind of making the same point with some different language about power and weakness. And the imagery that Jesus provides there is this image that we are like branches who are dependent upon a vine, which is himself, for life, for sustenance, for provision. And the image evokes a sense of weakness and dependence and neediness. And what's arresting about Jesus' words there is this notion that if you abide in me, if you depend upon me, you stay linked to me, you recognize your need and dependence for me and trust me for life, for fulfillment, for power, for strength, then you will flourish. You will bear, as he says, you will bear much fruit, right? It's this image of not just kind of, you'll be a tree that does okay,
right,
but you'll be a tree that does really well. But conversely, he says there, if you don't, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And this is one of the rare occasions where actually the original language of the Bible matters, which let me say as a pastor and a guy who did an MA New Testament, trust me, no matter how many times we geek out and tell you wish you only knew the Greek, it doesn't matter most of the time. But in this case, it does. And here, it's what's called a double negative or double negation, where the literal translation would be, apart from you, you can do nothing, really nothing. Jesus is emphatic about this. And it's this notion that, at least in his kingdom economy, the only place of true weakness is living life on your own.
Right.
The only place of true impotence is viewing yourself as the resource and fountain of flourishing and success and power and strength. He says, if you appeal to that, then this is the only place of genuine weakness. You can do nothing. This is the kind of radical notion of Jesus that the widow's mite, another story Jesus shares about a woman who puts in a tiny bit of money, right? But that literally in the kingdom of God, literally, this is more money than the millionaire who thinks he can leverage what he has to kind of curry God's favor. And not in some kind of like neat, warm, fuzzy kind of spiritual sense that Jesus doesn't really mean.
Yeah.
But like in a literal sense, that woman's putting more money in the kingdom. There's more power there than in the millionaire who's
All right, so let me ask you
leveraging.
this.
Yeah.
Preacher. Now we've had preaching from both of our guests today. I love it.
I was
Can't
preaching about
resist.
Harry Potter, but
So I know, hey. Regarding weakness, so we do a lot of Q&A. So we start our church services with questions with Q&A, and we just encourage loads of doubt and skeptics and curiosity.
Cool.
So we did a weakness, a teaching on weakness, out of Paul's very famous vision And here's the question that I would ask, but this person asks beautifully, so we'll just use their question. Regarding weakness, I do believe that God meets us in our weakness, and that's where we can see him work the most, right? Dallas Willard's great quote, where does God live? He lives at the end of your rope. Love that one.
That's good.
But here's his question. But what does that mean for everyday lives? What does abiding mean for everyday life? Because, I mean, everyone who's a Jesus person is going to go, yeah, of course. I've heard this a zillion times.
Right.
Am I to constantly put myself in situations that make me weak? Because that sounds scary and exhausting.
Yeah, no kidding.
So what would you say to that person?
Yeah, no, and I think here's what I want to start with is the kind of the misnomer, and Kyle kind of earmarked it earlier, that the goal here is weakness. No, the goal isn't weakness. The goal is true power. Right?
Hold on.
The end game is not eschew all power and just live in weakness.
Yes.
No. Paul says it's knowing God's power in the midst of my weakness. And it's this place where I can truly flourish, where I can truly experience the real life-giving power that is known in God.
Okay, now that is a game changer.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I didn't even pick that up from the book. I mean, I'm sure you said it, but that nails it for me.
Yeah.
In terms of, yes, you're right. The issue is power.
Yes.
That God wants us to be trustworthy with power.
Right.
But it's the way in which and how we define and how we go after. And
the question is, where do we think power really comes from?
Yes.
Right. And then, as Kyle said earlier, also, what do we think it's for? But initially, where do we think it really comes from? Right. And so what I would want to say as well, again, I get really practical and gritty, is we've talked a lot about leadership and leadership context, but the truth is, we don't have to go hunting to find our weakness. Our lives are a consistent experience of our weaknesses if we are willing to attend to them all day long, right? And weakness, kind of for us at least, shows up three ways in our lives. And we, again, pulled this from the Bible. But for us, it's, number one, we fundamentally, as kind of human creatures, are weak.
Right.
We are not all knowing. We're
Finite.
not all powerful. We're not God. And that is a truth of just who we are, right? And so, and it's not a bad thing. It's just a true condition of what it means to be human.
Yep.
Secondarily, we each as individuals have kind of certain unique weaknesses, right? So as Kyle referenced earlier, no amount of me, even though I believed this in high school, no amount of me playing basketball every day was going to ever make me Michael Jordan. It wasn't a matter of just work ethic. It's also a matter of not having the skill, right? And so some of us good at math, others not good at math, right? And so there's certain weaknesses. And then lastly, it is sin, right? That we've fallen short of the glory of God, that we do have areas of genuine vice, and these are weaknesses as well. And so what I would want to say is the landscape of our lives is a constant mirroring of these truths, that I'm finite, that I'm temporal, that I have limitations, that I can't resolve all the problems in my life, that I wish I had gifts and skill sets here, and as I'm working my day job, I'm reminded, like, I'm not really good at this.
So you come to that realization.
Yes.
And then what?
Yes. Those moments are opportunities for presenting the truth of ourselves to God in prayer.
Come on.
And opening up the truth of our heart to Him and saying, this isn't something to hide from or run from or seek to cover over or mitigate against. And see, this is where I think the church has really done us a disservice. We've kind of adopted, I I think, a very kind of American trope that no, weaknesses are meant to be kind of covered over with strengths, right? And so even in our churches, we talk a lot about discovering your spiritual gifts, which usually just align with the abilities we have.
Right.
And these are the things we're supposed to leverage and push forward and in effort to avoid areas of weakness. The truth is, areas of weakness are places to lean into and to open our hearts to God in prayer and to be with Him.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, this means, and this is, I think, where it gets particularly hard for everyone, but in particular leadership in the church. More often than not, you're leading into or you're living into your strengths.
Right.
You do have natural gifts and abilities. You know,
right.
you don't. If you're an accountant, you're hopefully good at math, right? Or you rethink your life a little bit, but it's going to be those strengths then that actually we're called most to embrace our weakness. Right. Because the weakness in our strength is going to be the desire to think that I can just wield this by myself in my own power. Yeah. But it's precisely in even my strengths that I got to kind of embrace the fact that no, I need Christ even here. Yeah, I need to rest in
greater
God here.
Yeah, it's easy for me to rest in Jesus when I know I can't do something.
Yep,
right. But it's when I've preached, 10,000 sermons that I find myself most likely to go, I'm good.
Yep, right. I know the formula. I know I can just go up there. I know the technique.
That's right.
And so we turn to technique, right? And this is why I think the average, so my seminary students, right, pretty typical what I call evangelical students, most of them don't pray. Most of them...
Dun, dun, dun.
That's right. Shocking. Yeah. Most of them read their Bible every day. Because it's very easy to tick a box and say, yep, nailed it. I did that. Right. But if you go sit in prayer, no one leaves that feeling like, I nailed that. That last hour where I slept for most of it, boom.
I killed prayer today.
That's why I'm not going to seminary these days, right there.
That's right.
All the spiritual theology stuff.
And so you just avoid all these things that awaken your weakness. Well, if weaknesses aren't things to be afraid of, then suddenly and this means, as to quote one of my favorite quotes from my spiritual mentor, prayer is not a place to be good; it's a place to be honest.
John Coe, baby.
Yeah, that's right. And so, my mentor and boss now, so I like to quote him. But
that's a good decision.
That's right. So, moving into prayer and the truth of ourselves is now an empowering reality, and it's just that these things no longer are what define me. And the idea that we have that somehow these things define me, my natural gifts define me, that's just debilitating. Yeah. And what that's doing in our culture.
Yeah, that's the exhausting part.
It's exhausting. And this is why, as a culture, we alienate those with either physical or mental disabilities. We alienate the elderly because they're unable. As when we interviewed James Houston, here's one of the most brilliant human being we've probably ever met. Here's a guy mentored by C.S. Lewis, one of the most famous Christians of a generation. And he's like, I'm now retired, so that means I'm not a human anymore.
Right.
And the reality of what it means as a culture, where one of the first things we ask each other is, what do you do?
Yep.
Wow.
And if you don't do, then you're not meaningful. And that's death.
Right. Wow.
And so how do we continue to then press into, well, maybe there's a different way to be a human being that is actually life-giving?
This totally speaks to, even just the central topic of ableism. We talked about this a couple episodes ago.
We both have kids with Down syndrome. Right. So we spend a lot of time talking about disability.
Right. But it's amazing when you transfer over that language and that concept even into spiritual aspects, into aspects of the church, and it's not just how we view people with disabilities, but then the additional aspect of how we categorize and judge people based on their own abilities, and how that becomes a defining factor of success and growth and everything that we're talking about.
Sure.
Dang.
So
one of the I think the provocative things that again the Bible gives us is that there's no one wholly needy in Scripture. That means what we do. So one way the church, I think, has wielded its power benevolently is that let's care for, let's say, folks with Down syndrome. Let's care for them. But the assumption has been we have something that they need.
Right.
Yes.
Versus this reciprocal relationality where that we are actually less as a people if they're not here.
Preach, baby.
And unfortunately, with money, churches with money almost always assume they have things that everyone else needs.
Right.
And so now they stand in a relation of power that is dehumanizing.
Right.
And it's not how we...
Well, think about our missions trips. All of our missions trips are expressions of power over people.
Totally.
Mexico, we're going to go build houses for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the biblical model, I think, is reciprocity is a profound one. And this is where I think, when Jesus says to his people that you will be known by your love, we live in a culture that is trying to eradicate people with Down syndrome.
Oh, I know.
This is precisely where the church should step up and say, what are we worried about?
Right.
Yeah.
These people are delightful, are profound.
Right.
What is the fear here?
Right.
And I think this is precisely where we could be known by our love, but we're not, because we're embracing that same kind of power.
Come on.
Right. I mean, it almost feels like the entire concept of mission should be flipped. I mean, where it's like going to some place in Ukraine and hearing about the incredible love that some small church is actually going to his community about, to go there and say, hey,
we're here to learn.
We're so screwed up in America because we're obsessed with smoke and lights and music and our celebrity pastors that I need to learn from you. Like, to me, that sounds like a mission, not to go there and say, what's your influence? Talk to me about your analytics reach. Do you guys got a Facebook page? I mean, it's like, but that seems like all the tools we've, made ourselves able of controlling, we now think that those tools are universal for what we call growth and, the growth of the spiritual kingdom. Yeah.
So let me ask this. So we've talked about a bit about how this plays practically. How do you build, so let's say we were all starting a church from scratch. How do you build a church or a community that begins to embody some of what we're talking about? What would be things that would be true of it? Things that you would be true of how you would lead? Yeah. Okay, so as a leader, so that's interesting to me, but also things that you would stay away from in terms of program or ways of or techniques or whatever. Right. What comes to mind when you think of that? If we're going to reconstruct on the idea of power and weakness.
There's a lot to talk about here, right? But
you guys talk. I love it.
Well, this is the danger of having a professor and a pastor. Right?
That's genius with mics. Yeah,
but I think, and I think we'll probably go back and forth here a little bit, but I think one of the first things that comes up for me is a kind of wholly interesting and non-unique concept that the historic practices of the church are really important. And this is something we actually end up getting to in the book, is that notice that kind of all the practices of the church, so when I say practice of the church, I'm thinking of communion, baptism, the reading of scripture, confession, that all of these practices, if properly understood, both as kind of prescribed by the Bible, or at least commended by scripture, and secondarily practiced by the church throughout the history of the church, if we view them properly, they're all a constant invitation to this profound truth that we are weak and that we are in need of another for strength. I mean, think about the notion of that I'm taking, whether it's bread and wine or grape juice, whatever your choice is, but that there is actual provision here, that I'm saying in this feeble meal, this is life-giving. I need Jesus, right? And think about how bizarre kind of an act this is to those who are outside the life of the church, that we're taking this meager little meal and passing it around, and we're saying, this is life and sustenance, because it's a reminder of one who broke his body for us, died on a cross, and in that we have power and life. Like, what?
Yeah.
That's what a backwards philosophy for life, and yet it is a demonstration of a certain location and source of power, right? That we're needy. Baptism is a demonstration of that as well. As we share in Christ's death and resurrection, there's power in this, right? That God's actually operative and present in these things. And so I think the first thing I'd want to start with is a very kind of, perhaps I suppose,
but that's the point. The fact that you have to disclaim it much shows how much we've still bought into it. It's not sexy. It's not incredible.
Yes. And I think to the point I made earlier, we've noticed how we have marginalized some of these practices and or framed them in very different ways to make them feel more powerful to us and to give us a little bit more kind of skin in the game in making something happen. As opposed to each of these practices historically is a profoundly kind of humbling experience, right? That something else is being done here that I'm being invited into, that I have no control over, that's been going on for a very long time.
That's right.
And that reminds me how much I need God.
Come on.
So that's probably the first place I begin.
That's good.
You know what? This is an example I'll give. I don't think there's any silver bullet model of church.
Damn you.
That's what I wanted. I wanted that so bad when I was a seminary
Remember the early seminary years? Maybe for you too, Mike. It was like, if we could just get back to Acts 2, you know? And then we pretend like the wrecks of Acts and like the rest of the Bible didn't happen, where people are bickering at each other and fighting over
right, and getting drunk in communion.
Acts 2,
that's right.
you know, Acts 2, right?
Right. So, you know,
just get back to Corinthians.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's my point right there, man. Yeah.
So already, you know, every church model has strengths and every church model has weaknesses. Like now I'm speaking in most naturalistic terms. Like there's temptations on either side, no matter what. The current church I'm a part of, one of the interesting things has been, you know, and you know, we moved 2.5 years ago back to Southern California, and we were looking for a local church to go to.
Family.
My family did, yeah. And so the church we found, it wasn't the church I initially thought, oh yeah, I'm going to end up at a church like this. Right? And it's, you know, to end up at a church has been very interesting, where I'm one of 5 or 6 folks who preach regularly, which means we don't have a paid pastor on staff.
Damn you.
We're a group of elders.
What would I do? What would I do for money?
Yeah. We have one paid guy. So we have one paid elder, and his job is like, he does half of just running the day-to-day kind of stuff. And then he's the guy that's going to be by your bedside in the hospital. Like, he's our pastoral care guy. And so again, I don't think that's the only way to do it. But the interesting thing about that has been, no one could come to the church because they love my preaching. Right. That would be a really stupid thing to do, because I'm preaching at most once every 4 weeks. Right. And what I love about the dynamic we have is none of us are similar. So we have different seminary backgrounds, different education backgrounds. We have a couple of guys with doctorates. We have a couple of folks just getting their master's degrees. We have all over the map. One's really, really pastoral. I'm a little more academic, big picture-y. Well, I mean, we're very different. And so what that's mitigating against is someone going, I go to this church because that guy's awesome, and I want to be connected to them. And so again, that's one way to press against one of the There's other temptations we have. I mean, that'll actually open us up, I think, to an other set of temptations with power.
Yeah, I think the other piece of your question there that I want to at least speak to briefly is kind of how do we because part of the back end of your question was kind of how do we as leaders maybe approach differently. Not only how do we think about kind of the structure of worship or our practices or kind of preaching, but how do we as leaders? And I think one of the things that really was arresting for me in the conversation with Eugene Peterson, one of these folks we sat with, and the pastor, as I like to call him, is his kind of commitment to this practice of being relentlessly personal. And for Eugene, that means a lot of things about how to do ministry and how to be a pastor. But for him, it cashes out in 2 ways that I've found incredibly helpful as a way to kind of stand against unhealthy, kind of toxic versions of power. Because the truth is, as a pastor, you just are in a position of power. I mean, seeking to kind of eschew that as like, I'm just not going to do that is a fool's errand.
The issue isn't whether or not we're going to do something with power.
Exactly. You're going to be in a position, if it's a small group of 20 people in your home as a house church, if you get up for more than 10 minutes and talk and everyone's listening to you, power is going on, right? The authority is happening. And so, well, how do we mitigate against some of the temptations in that to control, to dominate, to coerce, to use it for our own glory and end? And I think Eugene's commitment to being personal in 2 ways has really been helpful for me as a practice. One is to intentionally pursue relationships within that life of the church that are friendship-based relationships. And what's so fascinating is much of the culture I've grown up in and kind of been raised in as a pastor has kind of said, friends. Actually, you should not do that. You need to have healthy, quote unquote, boundaries, right? And maintain proper structures of authority. But notice what happens is the pastors move more and more into a position of isolation, further kind of calcifying his position of authority in a certain way over and against others who are always receivers of his. That's right. There's not a relationship of reciprocity and vulnerability. And so genuine friendships are needed. And of course we have to be discerning about that, who that is and when I do that. It doesn't mean every pastoral counseling session I'm bearing my soul back to the person, right? But the second area, and I'll close with this, the second area is outside the church. Like, what? That I don't just have relationships.
What? Wait.
Yeah. This is so crazy, right? That I don't just have relationships not only with just kind of the pastors in my guild. You know, because that's the first move is I only have relationships with other pastors.
I know.
But now, okay, maybe I have friendship relationships with other people in the church who are Christians, but actually having relationships with people who are thoroughly unimpressed with the fact that I'm a pastor.
Oh my goodness.
That have no
That's my wife.
No respect.
I live with one of those.
but it's the person on the plane or the coffee shop who, when you tell them you're a pastor, there's a
they
little
hate
bit
it.
of a cringe,
Yes,
right?
totally.
And it's those relationships we've got to have that I think for me have been really grounding, right?
Good.
That because even within the life of the church, even if you cultivate friendships, there still is a sense of you're still the pastor, and that is a weighty thing and an honorable thing, and even in an appropriate way, right? But there's something really good and right about having relationships with people who are like, man, I like. The fact that you're a pastor is not only not impressive, it's maybe taking you down a peg or two.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And now I'm having to relate out of different places that aren't kind of bound up in those hierarchies.
Yes.
Yep.
So for me, that means Andy will now have to forsake his power grabbing.
See, I thought it was the other way around. I'm like me sitting here with no respect.
And I'm very excited for Andy to hear all this.
He needed it.
So this was actually an intervention. Is really what this was.
Yes.
3 on 1.
Yes.
3 on 1. Yeah.
Oh, my brothers. All right, we're going to wrap it up. Andy Bear doesn't like it if it's too long. You yell at me sometimes when I get yapping too much. So so thank you, gentlemen. It is wonderful, refreshing. Hopefully you're stirred to investigate this more. So 2 Corinthians is a book that really a man named Paul, who was, he's Saint Paul to us. He's incredibly powerful to us, but his original crew, he wasn't much, and he has to defend himself, and he does that by boasting. His resume is in his weakness, and it's amazing. So that's one place to look. The Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard is another place to look. And then I would encourage this book. I think there's some really great, interesting stuff. One of the more interesting things that you do that we've hit on several times is you're getting around older folks. And that to me was part of the book I enjoyed most. Was like, man, I held Dallas Willard's hand once when he was doing an event at Rock Harbor, a church I was at, and I got in a prayer circle and made sure I was right next to him. And you guys commented, he has like the softest, biggest farm hands in the history of the world. And to lose him, and we're going to lose all of these, folks in the next 10, 15 years. And who replaces them? It's not going to be the hipster megas, because none of these people were. These were all people who walked on obscure paths that God gave favor to. They weren't seeking. And so anyway, I think it's a great investment of your time. Again, April 20th, sign up. Andy will have Facebook signups for our dance party.
Signups will be on the website.
Yes.
I will hit up.
And website is what?
voxpodcast.com.
Okay.
And all you Patreon supporters will get early RSVP, so look out for that.
Because you pay us money to buy Coors
actually,
Light
by
for
the
people.
time that this one actually launches, you will have already gotten the RSVP.
That's right.
So
take
it's
that.
coming.
So let us boast of our weaknesses for a moment. Andy is short. He has very soft arms.
Darwin would be so proud of you. Right
And Andy, his chest hair is minimal. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, I get like one sprout maybe every 2 years.
It's like the rings of a tree. You can tell how old he is.
You should see how fast I can swim.
So there you go. That was Boasting in Our Weakness by Mike and Andy. Anyway, my brothers and my sisters, thank you as always for being a part. We're grateful to be a part of your life. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance to you. And in these days, may he give you peace. Until next time, brothers and sisters, thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Vox Podcast. Learn more about us at voxpodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter at the Vox Podcast, and now support us on Patreon at patreon.com/voxpodcast.